we're so excited to have you starting at MAPT, and this is going to be in the next couple of weeks. We'll get you ramped up and going, and it's very exciting for us to have you here. But I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your background, you know, kind of what you've been doing, how you got to that point, and what your background is, and anything you'd like to say about kind of your story.
Sure. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd just like to say, man, I am so inspired this morning listening to Dalen's journey, listening to Dr. Davis earlier. This is my life's work. This is my passion. So I'm very, very happy to be a part of this event today. My background has always been in and around education. I am an academic advisor. I've been an academic advisor for over 8 years. And specifically, I work with pre-medical students, pre-health students in general, other areas too. But throughout my entire career, I've always really felt energized by students and their passion and their dreams are my dreams. I do whatever I can to help them get to that finish line, whatever that may be. And so this was just a natural transition for me joining MAPT, because now I really get to focus on helping students like Dalen, who have had a very interesting journey, whatever that may be, whether you're just starting out in college or you've had a few years of experience. This is a natural transition for me to join MAPT and be able to help those students along this path.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so tell us a little bit about your educational journey, your specific educational journey. So you went to college, obviously. What did you study, and what were your plans? And then
if I had to do it over again, I always joke that I would have been an astronaut or something to do with space, just because I love science and I love studying the stars. But alas, I didn't have the brain cells for it. But I did the next best thing, and I became an educator. My bachelor's of arts is in psychology, so I've always enjoyed studying how the mind works. My original plan was to become an educational psychologist, but then that sort of led me to working on a college setting. In a college setting, I worked with Kaplan many, many years ago. That was my first introduction to sort of working in the higher education environment and testing and things like that. And then that led me to decide, I started working in the international student arena. And again, always around education, always around students. And in working, I worked with the Fulbright program back in 2000 through 2008, working with an international exchange program with the Fulbright organization. That was my first introduction to, working in student affairs and working in the educational field. And that led to then me pursuing a master's degree in counseling with a specific focus in college student development, which then led to my current position as Assistant Dean in the Center for University Advising at Hofstra University, where I've sort of cut my teeth in advising and in helping students with general questions about classes and careers and things like that. And then more specifically with pre-med advising as well. So it's always been just about helping students figure out how they learn best, what they want to study, what do they eventually want to pursue as a career. And I really enjoy watching their development from orientation to graduation. That's watching that growth over the years is really satisfying and very rewarding.
Yeah, nice. Excellent. So tell us, how long have you been working with pre-med students over your career?
Pre-med students, 8 years. Pretty much. Yeah. So prior to that, it was more general, but definitely over about almost more than 8 years, actually, with this population.
Yeah. And you've worked with a variety of pre-health students, allied health students, and you kind of did it all, like most of us have in our careers in the pre-health advising area. You kind of did it all, both medical, dental, whatever,
PA. athletic training,
right.
yes, that predental, occupational therapy students. So our office advises, any career path. The majority tends to be pre-medical and pre-PA.
Sure.
For some pre-nursing as well, but
Right.
I've had I've had experience across the board.
Yeah. And I bet you have a lot of stories that you could tell about your interaction with students and kind of how that's gone over the years. But and we'll talk a little bit about
Sure.
that as we go along. One of the things that I'm really interested in is, what do you think makes a good pre-med advisor or advisor in general? What do you think? What is it about a person that makes them a good advisor?
That's a great question. I would say, to anyone watching and listening, um, your academic advisor should be someone that when you come to meet with them, while yes, we all have very heavy workloads and we might be, have many, many different students, when they're meeting with you, their attention should solely be on you. And so that's something when, I make a very strong effort when I'm meeting with a student to always focus on the student that's in my office or on the phone or over Zoom, as we've experienced the last year. And I don't ever try to rush a student. We have certain constraints that we work under, whether it's a 15-minute or a 30-minute appointment. But in that time and in that space, if your advisor should be focused on you and what you're saying. That's the first thing you sort of want to look for, someone that's engaged with you, that they're not distracted or trying to answer a call while they're talking to you. This is not a knock against the advisor because some offices are just that hectic and busy. But I always tell students, when you're in my office, I am solely focused on you. And that's very key, right? You want to be able to just have that space for your advisor to talk to you and answer your questions.
Yeah.
And definitely someone who's going to, first of all, ask you questions. What do you want to do? What are your goals? Not, okay, this is what you should do. They shouldn't, before even starting the conversation, already be ready to tell you what to do, right? You want to make sure that you have an advisor who's willing to just listen and ask you questions. What are you willing to tell me more about, your goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that often what we see in advisors is somebody who's committed at some level or another to education and to what education means in the life of these students. Often we get in the situation where at least in my experience, nobody kind of is in the eighth grade or ninth grade or in high school and thinks, oh, I'm going to grow up to be an academic advisor at a college. This is not something that is on very many people's radar screens, and so I think, at least in my experience, and I'd be interested if this was true for you as well, that you have an experience in college on your own as a student, and you see an advisor and you think, oh, I really love what they do. They are doing some cool stuff. I love the college environment. I love being in the college environment. I love the kids that are in the college environment, and it kind of leads us into this pathway that we never knew existed until we get there.
You're absolutely right. Like I said before, I thought I was going to be a psychologist and work in a school setting. I always kind of lean towards education. By nature, I come from a family of educators, and education was always very strongly emphasized in our family. So I grew up around that. But you're right. A lot of people don't really think about this as a career, and it wasn't until I started working in the Fulbright program that I really started to consider it as, this whole student affairs. The idea of there's an entire department or division at a university that's there to support students and provide professional development, provide social activities, and provide, your college experience, of course, is your education, right? You should get what you came to get and study and get your degree. But there's a whole other side to college that administrators like myself in student affairs provide to students. social activities being one of them, advising, academic advising, and you don't really think about it until you're in it.
Right.
And I realized once I was in it that this was what I enjoyed and this was my
Yeah.
passion.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think students can look for that in their advisor. Students can look for excitement, for this passion that comes out of them. So I definitely think that that's true was true for me, and it was in my experience in college, et cetera. So really what we want to talk about today and begin to focus in on is, how do students utilize their pre-med advisor to the best of their ability, and what are some things that we can do? And so I guess one of the first questions that I have to ask you about that is, there are some ways that I think we can that students can utilize their advising offices, but it all begins with knowing that there is an advising office to start with.
Correct.
And we have a lot of students who kind of wander around and don't really know what's going on, and don't identify that this office is actually here and it's here to help me. And we've seen, I used to see them all the time, and I'm sure you've seen many in your experience as well. How does a student go about finding out where their pre-med advisor is, what kind of academic advising is available on a college campus? How do they go about doing that?
Typically, the first encounter would be if you attend an orientation, if your university provides some sort of an orientation program. That's usually the first introduction, at least at my institution, where you have different sessions that you're attending, learning about the university, and the goal of orientation is eventually to create your schedule. Somewhere along the lines, along that activity, you'll find you'll be in a session with someone from an advising office. Every university is different. My university has a centralized office that works with all students from orientation to graduation, as well as a faculty advisor dedicated to that student through their major. So some universities may not have a central advising office, but they'll have a faculty advisor. But the first step would be at orientation, get to know, your orientation leader. If you have questions, ask them, who's my academic advisor, who will be my academic advisor. And if there isn't one, is there a faculty advisor? Who can I connect with? That would be my first suggestion. And then second to that would be just doing a simple search on your school's website for academic advising or major advising, and you'll get their resources from their website. Their websites are very comprehensive. So if you don't meet with anyone, or if you're not able to attend an orientation program, definitely check the website.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that, this is the first step, right? Is finding out where do I go and who do I see? And so let me ask you this, Varinia, is when should a student start going to their advisor?
Day one. As soon as you're settled on campus, you're moved in, if you're living on campus or if you're commuting, as soon as you're settled in with your schedule, maybe like within the first week or 2 weeks of school is always very hectic. As students are figuring out their schedules and classes, and do I like the professor, or am I going to drop my class? Sometimes that's the first reason they go to see an advisor, because they want to change their schedule. But once you're sort of more settled, maybe within after the first 2 weeks of classes, that would be a good time to say, okay, let me look and see who's my advisor. Let me set up an appointment just to get to know them so they can know me. With my students, we meet at orientation. And so we have a dedicated time in a group setting where they can at least get to know our office, and then individual appointments where they can get to know me. And then I'll say, hey, once you're settled, please make an appointment to come and see me in the fall. So the first month of classes is always very, very busy, but I love it because the students are coming in. And in particular, if they're pre-med, the sooner you meet your advisor, the better, because you'll start to then get information from them about the timeline for applying. What do I need to do? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so the main point here is go as soon as you get to the campus as a freshman.
Pretty much as a freshman.
As a transfer student, the first time you're on the campus, that first semester, you need to be visiting your advisor. That's right.
Absolutely. If you can, some students are more independent, and that's fine. You can meet with them in the spring, but I encourage students, just like your career center, for instance, you don't just have to go to the career center in your senior year for help with your resume, right? You should meet with them earlier so you can get to know about internships, things like that. Same thing with an advisor. You want to get to know them early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And now when a student goes to make an appointment with their advisor, and this happens a variety of different ways. Most advising offices these days have some sort of online method for scheduling a time with your advisor. So now let me ask you this, Varinia. If I'm a student at your institution and I want to see an advisor, and let's say it's in October, and I suddenly one night think, oh, I'm going to go see my advisor tomorrow. Is that how it works?
Not normally, no. Because just as you have had this epiphany, many other students have had the same thinking, and they may have scheduled an appointment much earlier. I know my calendar would often fill up weeks in advance.
Yes.
So I wouldn't expect to be able to get an appointment right away. Usually advisors are as flexible as they can be, or they may offer, your advising office may offer what we call quick question hours or drop-in hours, where we have dedicated hours in the day where no appointment is necessary, and students can kind of come in, see anyone, meet with any advisor, not just their own assigned advisor, and get an answer to a question pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And then at that point, if it's a longer conversation, we'll tell the student, okay, let's set you up with an appointment.
So those are kind of for short questions. Not, I'm going to walk in during walk-in hours and I'm going to say, I don't know what to do with my life.
Correct. No, I want to do a 4-year plan. No, we can't do a 4-year plan in those types of visits.
Right.
But because we're also working those hours, that means there's less hours for scheduled appointments. So it gets a little crazy sometimes. That's why the sooner you can schedule an appointment with your advisor, the better. Sure. If you can't get an appointment right away, it's okay. Make one for whenever the next available is. Yeah. And then if it's something urgent, you can go to quick questions, or you can email your advisor. I was constantly emailing students. But we're fortunate in that we have that structure. Some schools are just so massive that they really, they can't respond to students right away. Understand that it's not that someone's ignoring you. It's just that it is, maybe depending on the time of year, it's really busy. And so a little preparation on your part as a student goes a really long way. Don't leave things for the last minute. Right. Just like you wouldn't apply to medical school on a whim.
Right.
You want to take a measured and scheduled approach to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, throughout our time together today, we're going to be answering questions from students, and so if you have a question, type it in. Let us address it. We want you to ask questions, and so we have one that I want to pose here from Sam, and he says, what are some types of questions pre-med students should be asking their pre-med advisor? So here's a student wants to come in to the office. What should this student be asking you as a pre-med advisor? When they first come in, let's say it's their first time to come in to see you, what should they be thinking? What should they be pondering or asking you?
That is an excellent question. It depends on what year you're in. But if it's your first time meeting with a pre-med advisor, depending on where you are in your cycle, some of the first questions I get from students are, okay, what are the classes I need to take to prepare? Because not everyone may have a specific pre-med major. They may be majoring in something else, and they're not familiar with all the prereqs. So definitely you want to find out, what are those prereqs? When should I be scheduling them? Is there a timeline for taking these courses.
Mm.
What should I do as a first-year student? What are some of the things that I can do to get more experience and exposure to the field that I'm interested in? Or is there something, an organization on campus that I can join? Any sort of activities that you can be a part of on campus? Those are the most of like the initial questions that I get from students. And then as they move up in their years in school, then it becomes more about when should I think about studying for the MCAT or taking the MCAT in my application. But I think when you're first meeting with your advisor, you really want to talk to them about your interests and what your career goals are and what are the steps that you need to do to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I think sometimes it seems to me like, Varinia, that sometimes there's a very thin line between academic advising and personal counseling. There's so often things that are going on in these students' lives affect their performance in school or their drive or whatever. And they have, and so I'm wondering, is it appropriate to talk about with your advisor, not just what class I'm going to take next semester or when do I take the MCAT, but more things, deeper things about I'm having trouble studying, or I'm not doing well in this class and I don't know why, or things like that.
Absolutely. To the level that you're comfortable with sharing with this person that you're just meeting. But oftentimes, I like to say a very skilled advisor or someone who's in tune with students will automatically notice, hey, something's going on. I've had many conversations with students that start out about school and then it turns into a whole other conversation about what's going on in their personal lives. And I'm 100% comfortable sharing that, helping them through that. I am not a trained mental health counselor, but I'm a very good listener. And that's something else you really want to find in an advisor, someone who will listen. And then they can then point you in the right direction for help on campus, whether it's through the counseling services, whether it's through tutoring. Because yeah, absolutely, you're a human being. Life is going to bleed into what you're doing at school, and school's going to affect what you're doing at home. And like I said before, it's very rare that a student will come in, particularly a first-year student who's maybe not used to the pace of college, where everything's fine. Everything's 100% fine. Maybe, okay, great. But most of the times there are other things going on and we can quickly pick up on that.
Yeah. It's always a difficult balancing act between the two. I think one of the things that advisors typically are able to do is to direct the student. If I don't have the information that you need, I know where you can get that information.
Correct.
Or if I don't have the skills to deal with what you're needing, then I know what offices on campus have professionals that have those skills.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I know that in my background in advising, I've often had to escort, or I've had to tell a student, well, I'm not a personal counselor, for example, and so I can't really go any farther with this conversation because we're outside of my skill set. Mm-hmm. But I know on campus that there are resources that will help you. Here's this particular office, mm-hmm. such as the counseling center on campus, and let's make an appointment for you. You've had that, I'm sure.
Or also, even, absolutely, I'll call over to the counseling center and say, I have a student, can someone see them today? And on occasions I've walked a student to the counseling center, because, and I think any human being, any person will empathize with that student and have compassion for what they're going through.
Right.
Sometimes there's concerns that I just don't want to let the student walk alone.
Right.
But that, yes, absolutely, your advisor is not just, while primarily our role is for academic advising, you should feel comfortable, to whatever level you feel comfortable with, in talking to them and knowing that they can point you in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And point out resources. Yeah.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I'm wondering, often we get this, we hear this sometimes where students say, I just don't connect with my advisor. I'm not connecting with the advisor. And at least on your campus, how does that work? If we have a student out there watching this video later, or they're watching live now, or they're listening via the podcasts and stuff, and they're just not connecting with their advisor, or worst of all worlds, it's become somewhat combative. What at least at your institution, is a student able to switch from one advisor to another?
It's something that we certainly allow students to do if they're not comfortable with their advisor. It's so rare. Honestly, in my experience, it's been very rare. I don't know other advisors, but thankfully, it really hasn't been the case. However, if you as a student, if you're not comfortable, or you feel like you're not getting the help that you need, that this person's just not available for whatever the reasons are, there should be either a dean or an associate dean that you can maybe reach out to and just say, hey, I'm just having trouble reaching this person. Is there someone else you can point me to? You can feel comfortable doing that. If you're not, I would say you should also have maybe a faculty advisor that you can talk to in your major or in your academic department, or maybe another person in another office, like in your student organization. Obviously, your academic advisor is your academic advisor, and you really do need to go to them at some point. But if you're really feeling like it's not working out, you should feel comfortable asking if it's possible to maybe see a different advisor.
Yeah. And we all know that sometimes we connect with people and sometimes we don't. And it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can just be this is just not working out for me. I would like to try a different advisor, and just be open with both advisors about your goals and
exactly.
Good. So we have another question from our audience. This one is from, I guess it's I don't know how to pronounce the name.
Jenny, maybe? Or
Jenny, yeah. Are pre-med advisors able to write letters of recommendation?
Great question. So I would say I have written some letters in the past for students, but it has to be a student that I've known and I've really worked with. I've had some students who I rarely even talk to or see ask me for letters, and I have to politely say, I think it would be more effective if you got a letter from someone who really knows your study habits and your schoolwork. And they're fine with that. They accept that. But as in the other situation where I've known the student very well, I'll ask for their resume, or I'll see what their records are. I have no. I've been more than happy to write a recommendation letter for them.
Yeah.
And I don't know if your school has a committee process, and that's a whole other conversation of going through the committee letter process.
Right.
I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you do that?
Yeah. So a good majority of schools now have a committee process where there is a pre-med advisory committee. It's made up of faculty advisors. You'll go through an application process. If you meet the criteria to sit before the committee. Oh, someone has a question.
Yeah, we just got a question about it.
Perfect segue. If your school offers this as a service, you sit before this committee. If you're eligible, they'll invite you to sit before this committee that will interview you. And it's designed to mirror what a medical school interview would be like, at least at my institution. We ask students to provide a personal statement. It's a very lengthy application, so we can get to know them. And then once they've completed that process, the committee will write a letter summarizing, highlights from their experiences and what other recommenders have also said about them. And it's one composite letter that is then submitted with your application to medical schools, along with your other letters of recommendations. And I think a lot of medical schools do look for that. And if they know that a university issues the committee letter and then you don't submit it, they sort of kind of question why you didn't go through that process. But
yeah.
I don't know if it's required at all schools. I don't believe so. But a good majority of medical schools do look for that.
Yeah. And, I think depending on the institution, depending on the undergraduate institution, they do it, somewhat different ways sometimes. But in essence, I think you're exactly right. It is a process that allows the institution, the university that you're at, to support your application as a committee of the university that says, we support this applicant for the following reasons. We've interviewed them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then explaining, things about them and their experiences with you as a student, and then they provide the individual letters of recommendation from faculty and others that go with that committee letter in the packet, as it were, to the medical schools where you're applying. Does that sound?
That's exactly it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sounds about
and
right.
It's an opportunity and oftentimes pre-med advisors sit on those committees. Yeah. And that's why it's important to get to know your pre-med advisor so they can get to know you as well, and really have a very comprehensive and quality recommendation letter for you.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you, Rachel, for that question. So I'm wondering, Varinia, if you could tell us a few stories, maybe tell us a little bit about what's a student that sticks out in your head that was a great success story, that you worked with this student, and kind of maybe what was it about the student and what was it about your interaction with the student that really made it a great story?
Oh man, sure. I have quite a few. I've been fortunate enough to work with some amazing students, some traditionally, some post-bac students. They all come from, different experiences, and they've been through their own personal journeys. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. We had one student who was playing baseball at his university, had an opportunity to go into the pros, and I think he was even on the farm team for the New York Mets.
Wow.
Yeah, and he'd gotten that far, and then got to a point where he realized, while he was happy and he could be very successful, that wasn't what he wanted to do. So he came back to Hofstra, did Hofstra's post-bac program, and then completely changed his, career trajectory.
Right.
But had such an amazing story and went on and was successful in his application to medical school.
That's awesome.
So it's something I always think about, because you think, oh my gosh, he's a professional baseball player. Who wouldn't want to do that and have the fame and what comes along with that? But he was self-aware enough to know, this is nice and this is great, but that's not really what I want to do. And I've had other stories and situations like that. But at the end of it, what I always take away from it is that every student's journey is so personal, and that's what's important, and that's the most valuable thing, and that's what makes you stand out as a candidate. They don't want to see that you've done, you've checked off all the boxes and you're on paper the perfect candidate. It's really more about, what's your story, what got you to this point, and that's only you can answer that question. So if I had to give advice right now, I would say, don't try to do what everyone else is doing. Just be true to yourself.
Your own thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So when a student walks in to see their advisor, how should they prepare before they get there? What are things that a student should do if they're going to come see you as an advisor? What should they do before they get there? Should they, ask themselves questions? Should they do some reflection? Or, tell me a little bit about your advice to a student who's about to go visit their advisor.
I would say definitely come prepared with a goal in mind, right? Because your advisor is going to have just a limited amount of time to talk to you. And while, yes, I love to just sit around and shoot the breeze with students, sometimes you can't. You have to move along. So come prepared with whatever your questions are. It's okay if you can't quite figure out what it is that you're trying to figure out. Your advisor will help you figure that part out. But know, okay, my goal for this meeting is X, Y, and Z. How much to prepare for that is going to depend on what it is that you want to accomplish with your advisor. But at the same time, if you're just confused and you really don't know what you're trying to figure out, it's okay. Just, show up and they'll help you through it. One thing I tell students is your advisor's time is valuable. And if you can't make the appointment, please just let them know, cancel. I've had a few students, and it happens. Students just can't make it. They don't show up, but they don't let us know. And so it's, it's just a nice thing to do. Make sure you just let them know you're not going to be able to make it.
Yeah. It's called professionalism.
Yeah.
Yeah. It says, I made an appointment. I recognize that I can't make this appointment. And by canceling it, it allows somebody else to take that appointment.
Right. Exactly.
Because if you don't cancel it, then we're going to assume you're coming in.
Right.
You don't come in, we've wasted a whole spot that somebody else could have taken, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it happens. It's okay if you can't let your advisor know right away, or just maybe send them a quick note afterwards just to say email. Sorry, I couldn't make it. This came up.
Right. Good. Well, we have a question from Mia.
Sure.
Does medical school advisors, pre-med advisors, do they adjust your course schedules for students with learning disabilities, or is it just expected that these students have to adjust the best they can? So this is a good question related to students with learning disabilities. And tell us a little bit, at least at your institution, kind of how that works. If you have a student that walks in the door and says, look, I'm having trouble, I don't know what's going on, what resources are available at your institution that you can direct them to?
Sure, that's a great question. So oftentimes we have students who come from high school who've already had accommodations. Your advisor by law cannot ask if you have a disability, because that's something very personal to you and confidential. You can certainly disclose to them, and then the advisor can put you in touch with, hopefully there's an office on your campus. At my institution, it's called the Student Access Services Office, that works with students with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and they can help set you up with accommodations. But unless you let your advisor know that, they're not going to know. So I would say don't assume that they know. And like I said before, by law, we're not allowed to ask a student about that. Now, if your university, like I said, hopefully your university has, or your institution has, an office on campus, I think the majority of them do, where a student can go and say, I need accommodations for X, Y, and Z. Your advisor won't be able to actually set up those accommodations for you. That's something that the students office, the Students Access Services Office on your campus can do for you. But what I try to do with my students, if I know, because they've disclosed to me that there's this disability or something, I'll try to create a schedule for them that builds in, hey, they need extra time because they need to get to this class and it's far from campus, or they just need a break after one class before they can get to another one. That's something you should definitely feel comfortable and to disclose to your advisor and be open about what your needs are. Advocate for what you want. Your advisor will help you get that done for you.
Yeah. And that's really a good question. And I guess a comment as well is that your advisor is there to help you be successful. Regardless of what that means. If you have learning disability, the advisor is there to point you in the right direction. They may not be the point person for helping with getting that disability accommodation or whatever, but they know where to go, and they're there for your success, and they're going to walk along with you as you go along that process, right?
Absolutely. And I've helped students where maybe they're having a tough time with a professor because the professor is not aware of their accommodations. I'm happy to reach out to the professor and say, this student is registered with our Student Access Services Office. Whatever you can do to help the student would be greatly appreciated. So an advisor is definitely able to do that and should be willing to do that for you as well.
Yeah, excellent. I have another question I think we have time for. If a student decides to reapply after not being successful in the prior application cycle, is it okay to use the same committee letter for the new application cycle? What are your thoughts about that?
I don't particularly, I'm not a fan of using the same letter. I really wouldn't recommend it. If you're applying the following year, You have learned, you've done new activities, you've grown as a person, there's new things to add to your committee letter. At my institution, we actually have students complete a new application. They don't go through the committee interview again, but we do have them fill out a new application so we can see what they've been up to since they previously applied, and then we prepare a new letter for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this really goes to the heart of kind of application stuff in general, which is should a student use letters that are a year old or 2 years old if they're reapplying? And your advice sounds like your advice is that they should not. They need to get new letters.
I would encourage that if at all possible.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I certainly have always thought that too, from the perspective of from the medical school perspective. When I see a letter that's a year old,
right,
I'm thinking, well, could this student not get? Does the recommender not like them anymore, or did something happen, or why can't they get a new letter?
And I would ask at your institution if you're reapplying, if you still have access to get a new committee letter. I think we definitely provide that service to students, even if they're applying 2-3 years down the road after graduation. That's a question to ask. Is it possible for me as an alum to still get another committee letter in the future?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think it's because the letter process is a huge part of a pre-med advisor's role in the life of an applicant. Wouldn't you agree with that? That just the process of going through the committee, of collecting all of their documents, of studying them, and getting to know them. That's a big part of what goes on with between advisors and students in that application process.
Absolutely. And your institution might have a dedicated just pre-med advising office, in which case you're very, very lucky if you can do that. We have a small team of folks that are dedicated advisors and are involved in the pre-health process, but we do it all soup to nuts, where we're providing the activities, the student organizations, as well as the committee letter process. So we really do get to know the students well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of the joy of it, is getting to know the students. And I always felt that way when I was doing advising, is that it's always so wonderful to get to meet these kids. And some are younger and some are non-traditional, and they're a little bit older or whatever, but it's always good to hear their stories. Everybody has their own story. Everybody has an interesting story, and it's so fascinating. And I think students, at least in my feeling, is that students need to be willing to share their story with their advisor, and really talk in a deep way about what their goals are, and what they want their life to look like.
And if I could add, I think a good advisor is going to challenge you also in really digging deep and finding out what your motivation is. You want to look for someone who does that. You want to look for someone who's going to say, well, wait a minute, why do you really want to do this? You don't want the person that's just going to be like, okay, sure, whatever, sign off. Because that's not helping you in the end, right? If especially if you're having a rough semester, or your grades are sort of not trending in the right direction, you want to have an advisor who's going to kind of take that seriously and really kind of say, okay, you need to turn things around. This is how I can help you do that.
Right.
And we'll challenge you.
Yeah.
So don't get upset if your advisor sort of yells at you sometimes. No.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. A good advisor cares, and they will yell because they care.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. So let's take one more question, and this is back to the committee letter process, and this is from a non-trad. My school's committee letter isn't a letter packet like most. As a non-traditional student, it's proving very difficult to find science professors for letters of recommendation. So how do you advise students to find letter writers? We know that the schools want to see faculty, et cetera, and this is particularly challenging at schools with large student populations, where they may be in a class of 200, 300, 400, maybe even more students. What is your typical recommendation to help a student on that regard?
That's a tough situation to be in, particularly those larger classes. But the larger classes sometimes will usually have maybe a smaller recitation section, or maybe a lab instructor that will get to know you a little bit better. Those are all perfect resources to go to and ask for a recommendation letter. For a non-traditional student who maybe has been out of school for a while, that might be a little bit more difficult. But if you are retaking some sciences, you want to definitely from day one start to get to know that professor, make sure that they know you.
Yeah.
And and maybe Scott, you have more experience with this. If a student is just not able to get one from a science faculty, can maybe someone who can speak to their work in another class sort of count as a recommender?
Yeah, and my feeling has always been, if you're waiting till the last minute, this is the same advice for everything. If you're waiting for until the last minute, that's not good. Do it immediately. You got to, as you get into the classes, you have to get to know your professors, and you have to make the effort. It has to be an intentional effort to do that.
And they know that students will ask because they know they should be familiar with the process. So they will, it's not like going to come as a shock to them. I think what will be a shock is if you're the student that they never spoke to all semester and you're suddenly now asking for a letter.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Varinia, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great session, and we're looking forward to getting to know you more and more as you integrate into the MAPT family, and we're very excited about that. So thank you again for joining us today.